you to feel pressured in any way, okay? Any questions before we start? Awesome, let's dive in. All right, so as we go through, I know people navigate the patterns curriculum in different ways, but I just wanted to kind of give you the two ways that most people do it. So here's our normal Unit 3 outline. So if you've taught this before, this is kind of the one that you've always used. If you want to open that up just as a guide for things that you already know, feel free. This distance learning version is the one that we're going to walk through today. I'll put this link in the chat. So feel free, whichever is best for you. I know that these webinars, you can have 8,000 tabs open as you go through things. So all of these links will also be in the slides if you would rather just stay in the slides, or if it kind of helps your brain to go through this distance learning planner, you can do that. All right, so there's that for you. It should look fairly similar to our normal unit, except much, 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 much shorter. So trying to save time, trying to condense materials as much as we can in distance learning, just because it takes longer to complete tasks and we don't have as much time. Okay, so with that being said, if you are new to patterns, just remembering that these are kind of the design principles as we write this curriculum and as we edit this curriculum specifically for CDL, we still are trying to keep all of these things in mind, right? How can we center student learning? How can we get students to collaborate? How can we do inquiry? All of those things that make for a collaborative science classroom, we're still trying to put in our distance learning curriculum. Okay, so feel free to look through those design principles at your own leisure. Okay, and then with that being said, I think most of you have access to this. But if you do not have access to the teachers only folder with all of our keys and tests and student examples, please go to this bit.ly and fill out the Google form and request access for those materials. And I will add you to that folder after this class. All right, homeostasis. So we changed the name of the unit. It used to be from cells to organisms, but we really don't talk about that anymore in the unit because we took a lot of things out and moved them into Unit 4. So all of the mitosis, all of the stem cells, things like that, that is all now living in Unit 4, which we are currently writing. That should be done in the next couple weeks. So we're going to talk about mitosis in terms of cancer, right? Because in Unit 4, we do that big cancer and epigenetics system. So we're just trying to condense, tighten things up. So we decided to talk about mitosis then, instead of here in homeostasis. So this is our mini unit, right? Our anchoring phenomenon is still the same. The heart beats faster during exercise. Okay, and then our unit essential question is still, how do the cells, tissues, and organs of the body work together to control heart rate? All right, so our first task set is really the same, okay? It's an HKWL chart, so about what they already know about heart rate. Okay, so we like to do an HKWL because there is a distinction. This stands for heard, know, want to know, and learn. I feel like my students are always like, well, I don't actually know if I know that, right? There's like a difference between what you think you know and what you know you know. So we'd like to separate those two things out. And it gets students to be more like, oh yeah, well, I've heard this about this topic. I don't know if it's 100% right, but lowers the stakes a little bit and gets them to participate a little bit more and share their ideas, because it's okay if they're wrong, if they've just heard about it and they're not saying that they know it. So there's that. This is, I haven't started this unit yet. So my apologies right now. This links to not a Jamboard template. It is Charlotte's, she owns it. So She is actually out of town right now, but I will get her to put that actual Jamboard template in the unit planner and make sure that it is in there for you guys, because it's in her Google Drive and I don't have access to it. So I could not change that link. But there is a Jamboard for it and it will be updated by tomorrow. So if you're starting unit 3, just make sure you're looking in that unit planner and there will be a Jamboard for you there with this HKWL chart, okay? So they fill it out, they watch the heart rate video about what is a healthy heart rate, how does it change? Then they go back to their HKWL chart, fill those things out. And we also like to have these career connections every once in a while. So you'll see these in the unit planners kind of scattered through. These really are just like, hey kids, check it out. You could be a cardiovascular technician, make this much money, go to this much school, right? Like there's lots of jobs open, just kind of getting them to think about that a career in STEM looks like more than just being a doctor or a nurse or an engineer, right? Like there are more options in there for them. So we like to kind of point out things like this when we can. So feel free to show them that, have them do some research about what a career in STEM could look like in terms of cardiovascular health. All right, so our second task set of only 3, there's only 3 task sets in this unit. It is very small, but this one is much different than before. So if you'll remember from the original unit plan, we usually have them read that whole article and then they have to make a concept map and then they have to revise their concept map, and it's like super intense, really gets their brains working. It's a difficult task for them. We don't have time to do that in distance learning. So this is what we have done instead. I'm just gonna open up the slideshow and kind of walk you through what this task set looks like. Wait for my computer to load. Okay, so, right, our unit essential question, everything kind of the same, getting them to participate in the chat. And then we really just say, hey, there are things called feedback loops. There are positive ones and negative ones. We give them some examples of a positive and negative feedback loop, right? Tie it in to, I feel like this is when my students really get it, is when I get them to think about their thermostat at home. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that I see that all the time. I understand that, and your bodies are kind of the same way. So then we tie those feedback loops into the idea of homeostasis, right? Your bodies do this all the time. They turn on and off. And then we walk them through homeostasis of a neural pathway. So if you'll remember, the other slides had like double loops, double pathways of like the positive stimulus and then like returning back to heart rate. And it was very complex and complicated. We decided just to keep it as simple as possible and really point out the main things they need to know, right? So some messages come in, messages get processed, and messages go out, right? So you have the stimulus that goes into the brain does something with that information, and then the brain sends out a message to the tissues to control that, right? And so we've tried to kind of color coordinate these things, right? So we have the sensory pathway, control center, effector pathway. And so as they read the article, that's the color that they're gonna do their color coordinating in, right? And that's what I'm gonna tell my students to try to think about as they're reading this article. So the article is the same as it has been in the past, but the activity at the end is different. Okay, so they're gonna read the article connected. Like I said, they're gonna highlight the input in red, what happens in the brain in yellow, and then what the brain's response is, right? The effector pathway in blue, okay? They're looking for keywords, new vocabulary. They have this vocabulary list still linked here. This is the one, it contains words like sinoatrial node and sympathetic nervous system and all those things that students don't know and we don't expect them to know, right? So I encourage my students to have this vocabulary list out as they're reading. In class, I usually have them printed and on the desk right in front of them. Obviously, I can't have that in distance learning, but I will encourage them to have both things open. Okay, and so they're gonna read through this article about the homeostatic system of control of heart rate during exercise. We've kind of underlined some of the key words and key thoughts for them to make it a little bit easier also. And so this is the main part that's different that I want to talk about, is that instead of having them make all their sticky note big concept maps, all they're doing now, here we go. All they're doing is dragging and dropping things into an already completed concept map. So Charlotte made this last year, 2 years ago, made this key. Okay, and so we tried to highlight things in the same colors, right? The red, the input, the control center, and then the output, right? So all they're doing is kind of using these squares on the right to drag and drop where those things belong inside of this concept map. So this is much different and much shorter than the other task, right? Where they were building a model. Now they're just kind of using a model instead. And that is the task. Charlotte just edited this, I know, I think in the slides. Yeah, right here. So her option also has a CER describing if the heart rate is positive or negative. So she wanted another thing to put in the gradebook because really this unit is so short that there's not a whole lot of academic evidence going on here. So she wrote a claim evidence reasoning where students are just gonna type up a little CER, claim evidence reasoning on whether or not the feedback loop of the heart rate controlling exercise is positive or negative. So that's just another thing that you and your team can decide if you want to put in the gradebook or not. But yeah, that is here. It is also in the distance learning plan. Again, I said these, you get 8,000 tabs up when you do these trainings. But I just want to show you that CER real fast. So here's the rubric. And then part 3, so write a CER that answers the prompt. Does heart rate demonstrate a positive or negative feedback loop? All right, questions so far about that activity? I know it's a little different than the original one. Okay, so we're almost done with this unit. It's so short. But I wanted to kind of get us to think about this because it's so tricky in distance learning. So biology in itself has more complex patterns than it does in physics, right? So if you've taught physics, you do like the ball down the ramp and all that, you get like really pretty linear and quadratic, like really pretty patterns that are easy to explain, right? They're easy to find the line of best fit. It's not so much that way in biology. We describe much more complex systems, carrying capacity, right? Enzyme action with pH and like all of those kinds of curves. So as a team, as a council, we decided that if this is the place where the pattern is pretty easy, right? Like heart rate increases linearly over time. And it's a place where students can actually at home carry out their own inquiry. They can write a procedure, they can follow the steps, they can collect their own data, right? They can be scientists. without having to be in our classrooms for this lab, for the heart rate lab. So we wanted to keep it in here and include it. But the question then becomes, how do we elicit collaborative data discussions in a virtual setting where students are helping each other to understand patterns, right? It's such a way of our curriculum that students are communicating about their data, that they're talking about all of the different kinds of patterns that people are getting throughout the classroom. So how do we still elicit that collaboration? How do we still elicit that, oh, hey, here's what I got. This is increasing by this much, right? Or just discussion in general in a virtual classroom. What does that look like? So I'm going to give you just a minute, 30 seconds to reflect by yourself. And then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for a few minutes to talk about some strategies that you have tried to help collaboration in a virtual classroom. Because if your students are anything like mine right now, they don't talk. So I would love to get some ideas flowing about how we can get them to communicate with each other. We have in this inquiry. So this is the second inquiry that's been in the unit planner. In Unit 2, there was the enzyme lab, but that's not actually an NGSS standard. So we kind of noted on there, this is not a priority task set because we just decided that enzymes were important to know in a biology classroom. So we put it in there. So this really is the first NGSS inquiry lab if you've kind of been following the priority task sets. So it obviously has been revised so that students can do it at home. So I'm going to walk you through a few of the differences in what we've done to make it more distance learning like. Open up the slideshow and the student template. I apologize for my slow Wi-Fi. All right, so in terms of student template, it's gonna look the same. They still have a wild guess question. They're still doing a research question. They're still doing background information. So the research question in this case, or the wild guess question in this case, is what will the average heart rate of test subjects be after 65 seconds of this exercise? And is this exercise good for improving or maintaining cardiovascular health? So this is kind of a double whammy question, right? Getting them to extrapolate their heart rate with a pattern, right? And also getting them to make some recommendations about cardiovascular health with some of that background knowledge that they know. Okay, in terms of their research question, they're coming up with it on their own, right? What is the effect of my specific exercise that I'm choosing on heart rate of a 16-year-old female? Okay. So this is kind of the cool thing about this lab in general is that they've always gotten to decide what exercise that they want to do. So now I feel like they have even more options because they're not in a classroom. So I don't have to have teachers yelling at me as my students like run back and forth up and down the hallway. They can just do that in the comfort of their own driveway or whatever, wherever they might be, their own street. Okay, but they are writing some background information, pulling from that article, why does heart rate increase during exercise? What about your specific exercise is important to know? Which muscle groups does it engage? Are you doing squats? Is it good for heart health? Do you know that already? Right? And then how do different people have different resting heart rates, right? Why is my heart rate not the same as your resting heart rate? And that kind of stuff. So they write a little background information. This is still very patternsy, right? They put in their independent variable and dependent variable. This is a Google drawing. So they can just insert a line and make their prediction. Is it going to go up? Is it going to stay horizontal? What is going to happen to heart rate over time? Okay, control variables. This will be different. We are giving them, or we did in here, give them the option to work together as a group. So if you can see here, right, you have the option to work with a group, discuss virtually, and complete in your own homes, right? So it's suggesting that they stay socially distanced, but things they have to note, right, are that they need to control as many things as possible. They all need to do the same exercise, right? What can they control even if they're not in the same location? Are they going to do it inside? Are they going to do it outside? How deep are their squats going to be if that's the exercise that they're doing? All of that kind of stuff. Okay. So we have then some information about how to collect your heart rate, since we don't have heart rate sensors, right? They will either have to collect it if they have like a heart rate tracker, like a Fitbit or something like that, or they will have to measure their heart rate manually. So we give them the two methods, right? There's the carotid method and the radial method. I suggest that my students do the radial method just because there's the carotid body right there. And so if you give a carotid massage, it's going to decrease your heart rate. So it's not as accurate, but a lot of the times that's the only way students can get their heart rate. So if that's the only way they can, it is what it is. But there are videos demonstrating these methods, right? And then this video here is made by my colleague Charlotte, and she kind of walks them through the whole process, right? So she sits down, she calms herself down for a whole minute, makes sure that her heart rate is back to resting, right? Takes her heart rate and kind of shows them that process of what they should be doing. Because really kind of the annoying thing is that they're going to have to do this multiple times because we don't have a heart rate tracker that measures your heart rate over time. So I'm going to show you that in a second, but here's how they calculate heart rate, right? Check it for 15 seconds, multiply it by 4, then you have your beats per minute. Okay, same thing, there's a video with the fitness tracker. And so this is what I was saying, that they're going to have to do it multiple times. So they're going to have to take their resting heart rate, right? Okay, that one's easy. And then they're going to have to get up, do their exercise for 20 seconds, collect their heart rate, put it down, sit back and let their heart rate get all the way back down to resting. Then get up and do their exercise for 40 seconds, collect their heart rate, sit back down, let it go all the way back down to resting. So this is going to take some time for them to do, which will be kind of a bummer, but it's the best way to get a graph that's not just 2 points, right? Where you have resting and then your heart rate after 100 seconds, where you're actually seeing what your heart rate is doing over time. Does it go steep and then flatten out? Is it linear, right? What is it actually doing? So we have those directions in these videos, and they should be knowing that as they write their procedure, right? So their procedure is going to be specific to them or specific to their group and their specific exercise that they are measuring. Okay. So then after that, right, here's kind of where they collect their data. So if I'm doing it just me by myself, I'm going to tell my students that I would like them to have at least 2 trials. So to do the exercise twice, just so that they can get an average. If they're doing it in a group, trial 1 would be me. Trial 2 would be my partner. And trial 3 would be my other partner, right? So we're only doing it one time. and each trial is a different group member. All right, and then here are our different Desmos links. So this is just our normal Desmos template that you have probably seen before. They put in their data from the graph, right? They plot their data, they turn on their lines and try to find a line of best fit, right? That's normal. But what we have tried this year is I just did my first ever teacher Desmos with the Enzyme Lab. And a teacher from Hillsborough made it. And so I just kind of copied his from that and tried it myself. And I'm a big fan of Teacher Desmos, let me tell you. It's kind of like GoFormative, but for graphing. So thank you. Shout out to Jason Baca, if any of you know him. He's the one that kind of gave me this idea. So the cool thing about this is that students will put in their data here, right? Their time, their average heart rate, any kind of qualitative data. But as soon as I put in my points, it automatically plots them. And then I do the same thing as Desmos, right? I can graph my line of best fit. I do all of the fancy things to get it to move, okay? But what this looks like as a teacher, right? What this looks like as a student is this, okay? But when I go to, I haven't assigned it to my class, but when I look at it as a teacher, I can see every single student's graph. I can see what they're doing as they're doing it, just like on GoFormative. And then I can overlay all their graphs together. So I can show one graph with every single student's line on it so that you can really start to have those conversations about like, oh, this purple graph is really steep and this one is not. Like, what was the difference between those two exercises? What was the difference between the change in those heart rates? And so that has helped me, especially in the enzyme lab, that helped me to really get students to see things that are usually in a whiteboard meeting with two graphs right next to each other on whiteboards. But here now they're just virtual, that I can share my screen. I can make it anonymous so that nobody knows whose graph is whose, right? You can really just have conversations about what the data shows. So Teacher Desmos, big fan. I just tried it for the first time and it was awesome. It also allowed me to be like, hey, Jenny, like, let's work on your graph together. And so allowed me to really get some solid quality graphs and conclusions. Okay, so that's one way. Oh yeah, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry. Is Desmos like a free thing or do you have to subscribe to it? Or?
No, Desmos is free.
Okay, cool.
Yep, it's a free graphing app. And students should, like our students use it in math and it's on the, like all the state testing stuff. So they will have to do it on the, well, state tests probably don't exist this year, but yeah, that's what they use on the state test too. Desmos is great. Okay, here is yet another way, like you guys were saying, those shared slides templates, maybe this is how you get students to communicate, is with their graph on a shared slide, right? So we have this template that students can edit. Right, where they're putting their graph here, talking about their maximum average heart rate, their average starting heart rate. They're like discussing their data virtually. And then me as a teacher, I can scroll through all of these and help to lead a class discussion about the different types of exercise and how they affect heart rate and what that looks like. So those are kind of our two ways, 2 or 3 ways that we have thought of doing data discussions virtually. We also have a document version of the data discussion that's a lot like the slides template. It's just in a Google Doc. So they're kind of answering questions by color. So like student 1 is red, student 2 is blue, student 3 is green. So that as they answer questions, I kind of can see who's writing what, who's participating. So feel free to check out this document version of a data discussion also. I think this is the enzyme one, not the heart rate one. Okay, so those are the changes to the lab. Oh, the other big change is that in the conclusion section, there's always been a disconnect for me in this unit between like the two questions, right? Like, is it what's happening to heart rate over time, or is your heart rate, like, is your exercise healthy for heart health, right? Like, which question are they actually answering? So we tried our best to kind of merge that in this template. So they do some math. They do their maximum heart rate, which this is in the beginning video. They find out that it's 220 minus your age. So going back to that very beginning video. And then to be considered a healthy heart rate exercise, it needs to be between 70 and 85% of your maximum heart rate. So they see if their exercise actually hits that. And then in the conclusion section, right, they're doing their claim evidence reasoning, just like normal. But in your comparison, so instead of doing like a error analysis, what we're having them do is determine whether their exercise is good for heart health based on that calculation. So just trying to merge those two questions the best that we possibly could, because to me, there's always been a disconnect. So just trying to make that a little bit clearer in this lab now. And that is all of Unit 3. That's the whole thing. So like I said, it's very mini. There are really only a few things to collect in terms of assessment. There's the heart rate inquiry, the concept map drag and drop. I don't know how much of how much I would grade that, but maybe you do the CER on feedback loops instead. Okay, here are some more supports. So there's the unit INB. This is the document version, not the slides version. A unit tracker with all of the essential questions for each target, rubrics. We do have a paper packet for this unit for any of your students who don't have really reliable internet access or technology access. I have a student who still doesn't have reliable access, even with the district kind of reaching out. So I do give this to my student, and then we just kind of call him and talk to him about what he's learned. And it's worked out for us so far. So that's an option for you there too. Okay, and that is all that I have. So I will open it up for a Q&A now. But I just wanted to say that if you ever have any questions, feel free to email either me or my colleague, Charlotte. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have on anything. But yeah, I'm gonna stop my share and stop recording.